Hi class and welcome today. Today we're going to focus on an act called the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854. Make sure you pay good attention because we're going to have an assessment soon after. So to begin, we're going to talk about the Missouri Compromise, which is a compromise that we spoke about last week. As you remember, this compromise was passed in 1820. It was the passage of an amendment that drew a line that established a boundary between the free and slave regions. If you look at the map, you can see the yellow line. It's not a real line, but it's an imaginary line. Ultimately, the Southerners were unhappy because this meant that the Congress could make laws regarding slavery, and the Northerners were also unhappy because this meant that there was an expansion of slavery. To keep the peace, as you recall, there was a two-part compromise. This compromise meant that Maine would be a free state and Missouri would be a slave state. Stephen Douglas, to your left, was the Illinois senator that introduced the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Since Douglas was the chairman of the Senate Committee on Territories, he used that opportunity to promote development of the West. He hoped that Western development would have a positive influence on the growing sectionalism that was happening between the North and the South. A bill calling for Nebraska being admitted as a state passed the House, but when brought before the Senate, failed. Douglas was capable of gaining Southern support for the Nebraska development because of the Missouri Compromise restrictions. He then decided to introduce the idea of popular sovereignty into the bill, and he added the Kansas Territory to the Nebraska Territory. Popular sovereignty was each state's independent right to decide whether or not they wanted to be free or slave. This act was signed into law on May 30th, 1854. The response to this act was very violent. In 1855, violent attacks were known as Bleeding Kansas. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery people came to Kansas. The Northerners were known as the Free Soilers, while the Southerners were known as Border Ruffians. The Border Ruffians went into Kansas to vote illegally in all of the Kansas elections. Many of the Northerners became very infuriated that this occurred. Bleeding Kansas was a very violent time in the United States. Many artists illustrated some of the events that were occurring during this time, as you can see here. A pro-slavery attack was set on Lawrence after Bleeding Kansas. John Brown, as you can see on your right, was a radical abolitionist who was seeking revenge at Pottawatomie Creek. In this event, more than 200 people were killed. Even President Franklin Pierce had to send in troops to control the havoc. Many could see that this wasn't going away anytime soon, and everyone was afraid to see what violent acts would occur next. A lot was being said about the political parties. The Northern Whigs were not happy because they were afraid the Northern Free Soil Party would return. This would cause them a lot of problems. Also, they believed that the Southerners would try to expand slavery to the North. This was not going to be a good time. The Whig Party eventually was destroyed after all of these occurred. The Northern Whigs joined the anti-slavery Democrats and the Know-Nothings to form the Republican Party in 1854. This also brought back a very important person into the political world. Many know him as Abe Lincoln. On October 16, 1854, Abraham Lincoln gave a speech that led many to believe that he was against slavery. He referred to the act as a lullaby. He spoke of many ways why the territories should be admitted as free rather than slave. He said that ultimately the country needed the states to be admitted as free because the free states were more beneficial to the poor people of the country. Lincoln said that the free states are the places where the poor people could go and then better themselves. If the states were admitted as slave states, they would just be more slaves in the nation. It also would demand the need for more slaves to be brought in from Africa. This was eventually a predecessor for the Civil War, and many say that this was the foreshadowing. Your assignment today is to read the two excerpts from the Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas speeches that are located on links on my page. You will then discuss what Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas were both saying. Then you will write a one-page paper on each speech, and then you'll write another page comparing the two.